next few years. Now, I see that you were reporting that a family of fund managers have been sentenced to death after defrauding investors of $1 billion. Dan Collins, tell us more about this. I like the sound of this.
I knew you would, Max. I knew you would. Basically, Hangzhou, a city here from about 2 hours away from where I'm at, very Madoff type scenario, typical Ponzi scheme. They paid off the old investors with the new money. Long story short, they lost about $1 billion US, defrauded around 15,000 investors. But it consisted of a father and two sons at this fund. The only difference between these guys and Madoff was that they were quickly all sentenced to death.
Yeah,
and,
I like that. It has a nice finality to it. Now, of course, in the history of jurisprudence, this would be called a deterrent. If you commit a crime, there would be some kind of penalty, and I've often argued that there should be capital punishment for crimes against capital. So the Chinese have decided, yes, capital punishment's a good idea for crimes against capital when people commit frauds of this level. And, going back to this bimetal reserve currency option for Chinese investors and savers, if I'm in the West, let's say I had an account at MF Global. This is a bank that was in business for more than 200 years. Then John Corzine, former Goldman Sachs guy, took it over, committed massive fraud, started commingling accounts, and now JP Morgan has a claim as a creditor over actual segregated deposits at that facility. So trust in Western banks is now crashing. Why wouldn't I want to have an account at a Chinese bank? Because I know the Chinese, at least, they have a deterrent in place. John Corzine would be put to death in China. Of course, that would be a suitable punishment for him. Why wouldn't I want to be in China rather than the U.S.? Isn't that going to suck in a lot of money from around the world?
Absolutely. Chinese banks are much more conservatively run. They're not into these derivative products. They're old school banks. Obviously, they have they have some loan issues, but they're working through those issues. A Chinese CEO of a bank might make $150,000 a year with no bonus. You look at Bank of America, they paid 35% of their revenue in bonuses in February. And then this month, we find out, they're transferring trillions of dollars in toxic debt from Merrill into the Bank of America, where it's FDIC insured. I mean, it's total fraud. I personally don't invest in any American banks because I'll invest in no companies that pay themselves 35% of their revenues in bonuses. That's not sustainable in any industry.
Okay, I know that reports in Chinatown in New York City, there are lines of Americans every day when the bank opens to put money into Chinese banks. And I guess that trend, we're going to see more of that trend expand in the U.S. Of course, America hates competition. They're no longer competitive in the sense that they are growing their economy by innovating and competing. They're just growing their economy through foreign invasions and larceny. So they can't be happy about this Chinese basically emerging as the safe hands, that one would have their savings, and combine that with the bimetal reserve option. And this is going to further destabilize huge Ponzi schemes like a JP Morgan, for example, with $90 trillion in derivatives on their balance sheet, now caught in a commingling scandal with MF Global. Jamie Dimon, the CEO, now implicated in a number of scandals and frauds. So when a bank like JP Morgan goes down, a $160 billion company, when that goes the way of Enron, and we see it disappear in a puff of smoke one day, I would imagine that even more money would be flowing into these Chinese deposit accounts and taking advantage of this bimetal situation. In terms of geoeconomics, Dan Collins, the IMF and European nations are pressuring China to up their contribution to bail out Europe. Very interesting dynamic here. What do you see happening?
They will get some money, but there's going to be a lot of strings attached, and it's not going to be a lot of money. It's not going to be nearly enough to really move the needle on any type of European debt situation. Over here, they say, yeah, China, we like to give a little money so we have face. Looks like we're a big power. But at the end of the day, how can we justify a country that has such a low level of GDP per capita bailing out nations with very high levels of GDP per capita and people retiring at 50 years old? So they'll get a little money, but it won't be nearly enough of what they need to move any kind of needle in terms of their debt issues.
I'm making a prediction that China makes a play for Italy's gold, because Italy has 2,500 tons of gold. It's the biggest position in Europe. Why wouldn't China, who's starving for gold bullion with 1,000 tons, they're looking to acquire 5,000 tons to be competitive with the U.S. Why wouldn't China, because they were rumored to be bailing out Greece at some point, but of course Greece only has 110 tons of gold. Why wouldn't China make a play for Italy's gold and say, you know, we want that 2,500 tons of gold, and in exchange, we'll float some kind of lending facility to you. What are your thoughts on that?
We look at history, that's happened many, many times. Right before the Lend-Lease Act in World War II, the first thing the U.S. did is have the British send all their gold over. So we could easily see that happen today. I don't know if we'll ever hear about it in the press, but it could easily happen. And you could easily make the case that America may have to send gold reserves to China at some point as well.
Okay, so clearly gold is now back in play after many decades of being really off the table, considered the barbarous relic by John Keynes. Now it's suddenly in vogue once again as people realize that these trillions of dollars worth of debts that can't be paid won't be paid, and we're going to need to recalibrate the global currency grid. In a recalibration of the global currency grid, how do countries like China, Russia, and Iran come out of that?
Well, I think they're all different. I like China's position because when the global financial system eventually reboots, they have the factories, they have the engineers, they have the productive capabilities, they'll have the relationships with the developing world to import the commodities. They won't need to export so much, loaning money to a country that can't afford it to buy their goods. So I think eventually they may be okay. Russia, I'm not an expert in, but they're very highly dependent on gas. They need to diversify their economy. But and I like China's chances eventually when the global financial system reboots.
All right, let's talk